Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle. Thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com and at the Sonic Cinema podcast YouTube channel. We're continuing on with the class of 1999, and we're going to a film that is a little bit of a footnote in this year in that it's much more of a star vehicle. It's one of the big it's I wouldn't say it's one of the big star vehicles. It did reasonably well at the box office, but it was definitely a star vehicle in the sense that it was very much a Mel Gibson movie, and it wasn't. And as we'll discuss, the production, while it's very much it's in a way the vision of the filmmaker. It's also a film where you see the idea of the filmmaker and the studio pushing back on one another. It's Brian Helgeland's crime thriller Payback. Joining me to discuss the movie once again is a writer and director. I've talked to him already this year about being John Malkovich and Bringing Out the Dead, and I'm pleased to be joined once again by Brian Ackley. Thank you very much for joining me.
Hey, Brian. Yes, it's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Payback, when I was coming back to revisiting, when I was going back through revisiting films from 1999, this was actually one of the first ones I did get to. And it's a movie that it came out in February of 1999. It was a decent hit. This was very much sold on as a Mel Gibson starring vehicle, and if you look at the trailers, if you look at the promotion at the time, that's basically how it was treated. There we'll get into the post production and basically sort of what happened with the studio as far as the eventual release of this. When did you first watch this movie?
I think I caught this on DVD. I want to say were DVDs out then? Maybe I'm thinking VHS.
They were in their infancy. They were. It was right before DVDs really took over the big format, home video format. So DVDs were starting to make their presence felt.
This would be about a year and a half or 2 years after I graduated from high school, and I was living with a good friend of mine, and it was kind of a bachelor pad situation, and because the place was just a complete mess, and he had a great job, and he loved movies. He would buy movies without even knowing what they were about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this movie, I don't think I sought this movie out. I think he just happened to have it, and we threw it in. I may have been doing something else. It was like it was on in the background, and so I discovered it by accident, by pure accident. And once I started, it only takes one scene to really hook you. You know, It's almost like almost any scene will hook you. So it was a really new way for me to discover such a great film.
Okay.
Because I was nowhere.
Yeah. So I actually saw this in theaters. One of the things about me at this time, because I was in college at the time, and I would go to my mom and I would go to movies like basically every week. And this was one that we went to go see together. And she at the time she was kind of on the tail end of a celebrity crush with Mel Gibson, which is a bit embarrassing to admit to now, given the past decade of his life. But at the same time, it was something where he very much was a star, and this was at the time like. The previous year, he had done Lethal Weapon 4, which rounded out that series. He had done Conspiracy Theory, Ransom, Braveheart. He had won the Oscars for Braveheart. So he was very much in. He was still very much a celebrity and a movie star at the time, and and he was somebody that very much connected with her as far as a presence on screen, and we would go to see his movies all the time. And this one, I think she only saw once. I think she only saw it the one time, so it was starting to peter out as far as this. But this is a movie very much sold on Mel Gibson essentially playing a bad guy, even though in the context of the story being played, he's not really. He he's the better of the bad guys, which is to say,
Yeah.
he's got his own very specific moral code. He's got his own idea. He's got his own sense of right and wrong that we kind of notice throughout the film. The film, by the way, is based on the novel by Donald E. Westlake, and it's a novel that had been previously brought to the screen by John Boorman in the '60s as Point Blank, with Lee Marvin playing essentially the Mel Gibson character.
Oh, okay.
So this was the work of Brian Helgeland, who was coming off of winning an Oscar for L.A. Confidential, and he had written Conspiracy Theory with Mel Gibson. So this was their this was another collaboration with them after Conspiracy Theory. And and the thing is, if you look at the character of Porter, you can really see what would have drawn Mel Gibson to this character. He's very much in the Martin Riggs, in the Mad Max sort of mold, as far as the type of character, the sort of rebellious character that Mel Gibson will have been playing at this point in his career. And so as the film was going through production, they were doing test screenings, and the test screening, the original cut that Helgeland had put together did not really test screen well, and it was a bit darker. Was not really. It was a lot grittier. It it wasn't really the star vehicle that I think Gibson and the studio had wanted. So basically, what happened was they rewrote it with Terry Hayes, who would later uh, go on to direct Hotel Rwanda. And then I think he was the one who actually directed. I don't remember if Helgeland directed the new scenes or if it was Terry Hayes, but basically Helgeland's original vision of this got away from him, and so the version that we saw in theaters was this sort of studio version of the movie that is more fan friendly. It's more not fan friendly. That's not a good way of putting it. It's more accessible to audiences. And then several years later, Helgeland's original cut did get released on DVD, and it's known as Payback Straight Up Director's Cut. And I actually, one of the things I was really kind of excited about when it came to us doing this is it gave me a chance to finally see that cut, see Helgeland's cut for the first time. And it's definitely a different experience, but one of the things that is so interesting to me rewatching it and then again comparing it to the director's cut is that the theatrical cut is still really entertaining, and the differences in it, if you just told me that this was the only cut of the movie, meaning the theatrical cut, it felt like something that very much would have been it's something that very much I think will have satisfied me overall. And I mean, it's a very fun movie in a lot of ways.
When we were well, let me start again. I've only recently discovered this director's cut that came out 4 or 5 years after the fact, after the original. And so in the last like 2 days, I've just kind of been reading up on it, and I wasn't able to get a copy to see the director's cut.
Mm-hmm.
But this whole thing, this is like it's really neat because there's so much that is different about it.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, from the little that I've seen, there are some clips without the color grade, without the blue tin color grade.
Mm-hmm.
So the director's cut version. There's a couple of clips on YouTube, and based on what I've read about what a lot of these differences are, I really don't think I would like the director's cut. In fact, it seems like the theatrical release version has more of an auteur feel to it, style to it. It's so brash, especially in the times, you know, between the color grade and the voiceover. You know, you just don't get that noirish type of storytelling. You didn't then, you know. I guess it's come back.
Yeah.
Still, you just don't get that very often.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that I would like the director's cut version, but I'm curious, man. I'm very curious because I hear the whole third act was rewritten. So how much of it was reshot? Because
well, like you said, I mean the third act of it is very different. The theatrical cut has a somewhat conventional happy ending for Porter, the Mel Gibson character, whereas the original, the director's cut is a little bit more it's a little bit more in keeping with film noir. And that's the biggest difference between the director's cut and the theatrical cut. The director's cut is very much more of a film noir piece as opposed to a crime movie. And I mean, they're both crime movies, but like the theatrical one is definitely more of a crime thriller, and it doesn't really play with the same. It doesn't have the same type of ideas as far as film noir. It doesn't have the same callbacks to film noir and what we consider film noir from like the 40s and 50s. The one, if you would if the movie had been made in, if the director's cut had been made in like the 40s and 50s, and obviously it would have to be like the violence and stuff like that would be muted for, you know, the time, it would fit very much in that same time frame as far as the type of movie it was. I personally see. I actually personally think the otherwise. I do think I see why. I feel like the director's cut is a better version of it, but at the same time, it's hard to not really enjoy the theatrical version.
Yeah, cool. So okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But as far as differences, you mentioned the color grading. That's very much the blue tint is very much something from the theatrical version that they did. It's not as, but the thing that I like about the director's cut, it still has some grit to it, even if it doesn't have that tinted that blue tint to the visuals. It still feels very gritty. It still feels like something out of the 60s and 70s. The music is a bit different as far as the way, like this, the straight up cut is a bit more jazzy. The soundtrack to the the theatrical one is a bit more conventional. It's still really entertaining score. Both of them have really good scores and soundtracks to them. The director's cut's a bit jazzier. There's it starts with audio flashbacks as opposed to narration. So over the opening credits, it has audio flashbacks basically. So instead of us seeing what happens, sort of seeing what happens to Porter, it shows us it. We hear it more than we actually see it. Um, the way it uses flashbacks, it shows more flashbacks as opposed to just being more of a straight line narrative. Especially when it comes to scenes with his wife. Um, and it's very much, and the thing about the director's cut, it's while Porter is very much still the main character, um, it's more about the world that Porter lives in rather than just following him on this journey that he's going on to try to collect the $70,000, which he is owed from his partner and his wife who double crossed him.
Say that last part again. It's more the director's cut is more about the world.
It feels like it. One of the things that I wrote down is, let's see, this cut being the director's cut is as much about the world that Porter lives in rather than just focusing on Porter himself and focusing on his journey. Like you don't really like, one of the big things is Chris Christopherson's you don't see the main bad guy in this. You don't see the main bad guy, the one played by Chris Christopherson in the theatrical cut. It's just a voice over a telephone. So that's one way in which the ending of it's very different. But I do really like the movie overall. It's still a very fun movie. It's a very fun piece of crime entertainment. I mean, that's one of the things that I really like about Helgeland as a filmmaker, and it's kind of a shame that he hasn't really. It occurred to me rewatching this and then watching the director's cut that it's like it feels like we haven't really heard from him in a while. And I think like, because after this he did Knight's Tale, which a lot of people really like, and it's a fun movie. And then he did a couple of other movies, and then we really have not seen too much more from him over the past few years. So it's actually kind of surprising to see the way his career sort of dropped off after this.
Yeah, I guess I'm looking at his IMDb page now. I've only seen 42 after Payback.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I haven't seen.
That was the most recent thing.
And I didn't really care for that much.
Yeah.
So, can you tell me what I didn't have a chance to look up old reviews. How was the theatrical release received by audiences and by critics?
Well, audiences, it was a fair hit. It was about $80 million, which, I mean, was kind of low for Gibson at the time. But at the same time, it was, for the type of movie it was, for how gritty the movie is as far as being an R-rated movie, and the fact that it's very much a crime thriller and has dominatrixes and stuff like that. It was about 80 million, so I mean it's a fair hit. It's a decent sized hit. I didn't really have anybody that I knew that overly disliked it. I mean, I know people who've enjoyed it. So it's, and critically I think it was fine. I think critically it did fine. I mean, by the time it did come out, I mean, the story had already been out as far as sort of what had happened behind the scenes. So, I mean, people knew they weren't necessarily getting the cut that Helgeland originally envisioned. but at the same time, it's one of those things where it's like there's nothing overly. I don't think there's enough that's overly different from one cut to the other to where if knowing sort of like what happened, the main reason you might be upset about not seeing Helgeland's cut at the time is the fact that it's like, well, the studio sort of kind of took it away from him, which is kind of unfortunate, but it's still a really entertaining movie. And critically speaking, I think it did pretty decently. So
now I just want to make sure that I'm under the impression that Mel Gibson's company was one of the production companies that put this thing together.
Yeah, Icon Productions. He was one of the producer. Him and his producing partner at the time, Bruce Davies, were Davey was they were involved in creating this. I mean, I think.
Yeah, I wonder how.
Go ahead.
I wonder how much of a hand Gibson had in directing the reshoots.
I can't actually. Let me go to. Let me go to the IMDb page to see, because I thought Terry Jones was the one who directed it, but let me see. Because I think Terry Hayes was the one who was. Let's see. I don't know if it's.
And then I even read something about Gibson having I read something about Gibson having something to do with the rewrites also with Terry.
Yeah.
So that you can't. Yeah, I mean, it's all a possibility. You can't trust.
Yeah.
All of what IMDb says.
Yeah. I mean, I thought they had. I mean, I thought they had. The only thing I'm noticing just off the top of my head is just looking at IMDb pages that it just says that Helgeland was fired shortly after he had won the Oscar for L.A. Confidential. So I mean, that was about 98 is when he got fired from the film, and 30% of the movie was reshot after that. I'm pretty sure it was Terry Hayes that directed the reshoots. I mean, I'm sure Gibson probably had a say in that as well. Let's see. Oh, wait a minute. Actually, no. Wait a minute. It does say here. Production designer John Meyer supposedly either Gibson said that he was the one who directed the reshoots, but also according to what his personal website, Paul Abascal was the director hired. So what did he direct? But I mean, the whole point overall of this is that okay, he's mainly known for TV. So, and he had worked with Gibson before, so that kind of makes sense. But I mean, but overall, the point of all of this is basically that like the film was taken away from Helgeland after the studio did not really.
Well, let me bring up something because. Because the phrasing that you use, it assumes that it was Helgeland's project from the start.
Yeah.
Or Helgeland's projects from the start, and that may not necessarily be the case. It could have been Gibson's from the start.
Right.
I mean, it could have been his production because this seems like something, like you were saying, it seems like something Gibson would do.
Yeah.
And so Gibson could have brought, his production company could have brought Helgeland on straight, as a writer and then as a director, and not been happy with it. So and then took the project back.
Yeah. So I mean, according if because the thing is, it's like IMDb is always, it's like whether it's IMDb, whether it's Wikipedia, you always wonder whether it's accurate or not. I mean, Helgeland supposedly was working on this script during post production on conspiracy theory, and so and then Gibson looked at the script and saw the first act and he was interested. So I think to a certain extent it was a little bit more collaborative, but the
Okay.
fact of the matter is, but ultimately, if you do watch the director's cut, I mean, I can see why, based on the director's cut, that I can see why Gibson would have wanted to do the film because it is a character both as a piece with his previous work, as far as Mad Max, as far as Lethal Weapon, as far as those type of rogue hero type characters. It fits in well with what he's familiar with, but at the same time, I can also see him watching the director's cut and going, yeah, that's probably a bit darker than I was hoping, and wanting to change it a little bit to be more of make it a little bit more of a vehicle for him. Because really, I mean, that's the thing about the theatrical cut is that the theatrical cut is very much it is very much a movie star vehicle. It's basically Mel Gibson working his way through uh, the the criminals, working his way up the ladder to get $70,000, and then he has run-ins with a couple of corrupt police officers, played terrifically by Bill Duke and Jack Conley. He has a dominatrix that he has to deal with, who's played wonderfully by Lucy Liu, and then he has to go through the chain of command in terms of William Devane, then James Coburn, and then Chris Christopherson. So I mean, you see the shape of the storytelling in the theatrical cut, and it's kind of the same. It just takes in the director's cut, but at the same time, like the you see the two, where the two veer in different directions. And it's really, if for no other reason, it's interesting to watch the director's cut, even if you prefer the theatrical. Because there's nothing wrong with the theatrical cut's really entertaining, and it's really a lot of fun to watch. Um, it's one of those things where are you still there?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, just want to make sure. It's one of those
Yep.
things where I can, it makes a lot of sense to be able to enjoy the theatrical cut, but at the same time, as if you're more interested in having in like film noir, if you're more interested in that type of crime, the director's cut is a good example of how you can take a story like Payback and take it in that direction as well.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk Mason's performance,
Yeah,
and on get your take on his performance in comparison to a lot of his earlier work, particularly in that decade.
yeah,
Because to me, the character roughly fits into the story. The character roughly fits into the Mel Gibson persona.
yeah,
But I don't quite see it as a star vehicle, as you do, because the character is so different than what he's played before. And this is going, and apparently the director's cut is even more rough.
yeah.
I mean, compared to you and what I've read.
Yeah, and and that's
what's
part
that?
of, and I think that's part of why I think that's part of why they ended up changing so much of the movie anyway after seeing the director's cut, is because yeah, his character is definitely much more rough. It's a bit it's very much a darker type of character that we were used to seeing him in at the time. I am somebody who, regardless of how one feels about Mel Gibson as an individual, I've always thought he's an incredibly underrated actor. Um, I love performances of his, like in Ransom. I think he does wonderful work in Conspiracy Theory. He did some fantastic work in the first two Lethal Weapon movies. He does really strong work in a lot of his movies. Um, Payback is definitely I would say he's really I don't know where I would put it in terms of. I would probably say in the. I would say it's probably in the top 10 of his performances for Payback. I would put it up there. I don't know if I could necessarily go top 5. It's probably close to 6, 7 or so. I would say it's a really good performance of his, though.
Would you say, here's the key question for you though, would you say that his performance is an outside the box performance for him? And for me, because I think so, and I thought so when I first saw it. That's what really drew me in. Basically, I see it as almost being the opposite of the winking at the camera character that he'd play in the Lethal Weapon movies,
Right.
and even in Maverick. So it's
Yeah.
not. This isn't a playful movie or a playful performance at all.
Right.
So would you see it as outside the box performance?
Um, I think if you take in consideration a lot of what he was doing at the time, a lot of what's on the before this and after this in terms of, yeah, I mean, you look at Lethal Weapon 3 and 4, they're definitely more jokey. Maverick, like you mentioned, is a comedic performance, star performance of his. Conspiracy Theory has a lot of um, it's got a lot of dynamics. It's not really a dark performance, but it's got some darkness, but it's also got a lot of really good humor where he's capable of really good humor in it. So in terms of what he was doing at the time, I would say it's outside the box of what he was doing at the time, but at the same time, if you're familiar with like the first two Lethal Weapon movies, if you're familiar with the first two Mad Max movies and even Ransom, which was a few years before this, it's very much in keeping with it's keeping with the
With how
persona
dark he
that
can
I
go.
think he was.
Yeah.
It's keeping with the persona that he was comfortable with. So even if it's kind of outside of the box for that time frame of Gibson's career, I think it's definitely very much of a piece with a lot of Gibson's work.
You know what? And I might be wrong about that because he does go to dark places when playing with other characters within even that decade. So what really stood out for me, maybe why I headed in that direction, was the I, was how strange and interesting a decision it was to essentially create a crime comedy, because this film has a lot of comedy in it, but Mel Gibson is not the source of most of that comedy.
Yeah, it's other characters.
Like most any other film of Mel Gibson's where comedy and action and crime are involved, Mel Gibson is dishing out a lot of that comedy,
right?
But not in this film. And I find that so wildly interesting a decision to make, or a bunch of people's decisions to make, really, and entertaining. It was so that's kind of where I was coming from.
No, and that's an excellent point, and it goes to the fact that this is probably one of the best supporting casts that Gibson's ever had in one of his movies.
Oh, it's such a great
you,
cast. Yeah.
you look at William Devane, you look at James Coburn, you look at Chris Christopherson as the main bad guys. You have Maria Bello as the hooker he has a relationship with. You look at Deborah Unger as his wife who screws him over with the fantastic Greg Henry. You have David Paymer, who's always fun, regardless of what he's in. You have Bill Duke and Jack Conley, and then you have Lucy Liu. It's a phenomenal cast. It is. And you're absolutely right. And I even rewatching it a few months ago, it occurred to me that like you're absolutely right. There is very much that type of humor that you're used to in a Mel Gibson movie, but at the same time, he's not the one dishing it out, and that's what makes it so
inverted. It's crazy. Yeah,
yeah.
I love the cast. Also, the cast is top notch. The one? Well, maybe you have an all-star standout. Mine is the guy who played Val. What's his name?
Greg Henry.
Greg.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's fantastic.
He has some of the best lines. Yeah. Do you have a standout your performance?
Yeah, I would say he's probably him and Lucy Liu are probably the two that stand out the most. I mean, Lucy Liu's more because of the fact that it's like she just really goes to 11 when it comes to playing the dominatrix role.
Yeah.
And I mean, you consider
that dynamic she really.
And you consider the fact that like that was right around the time Ally McBeal started, and then later on, and then I think her next big movie project after this was Charlie's Angels. So, but yeah, I mean, Greg Henry's probably, other than Gibson, probably my next favorite performance in the movie. But yeah, just the supporting cast in this movie is just really good. And just really strong, and it gives him a lot. It gives Gibson a lot to play off of too.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you look at the three essentially, I mean, I guess there are a bunch of villains, but the syndicate, the main three top villains, there ends up not being too much that happens with them because there's so much happening in the story. There's so much plot. But the portrayals of these characters are so well done that they're threatening. Like as soon as Chris Christopherson comes on the screen, he just has a threatening presence. And this is while he's in the presence of his son, even he just has a the same with the others. These characters aren't really in it that much, but you sense the great deal of danger that Porter is in.
Yeah, and the thing that's really fun about this is that it's not the type of it's not really the type of crime movie that we were necessarily used to at the time. It's almost, and I mean, it is almost a little bit like it's not really it's not a Tarantino clone, like we saw a lot of movies that played with, that tried to be Pulp Fiction after Pulp Fiction. This one is very much not necessarily in that vein, but I mean, it's sort of in that vein with the level of dark humor, with the use of supporting casts and large ensembles and stuff like that.
Oh, I see.
In terms of telling a story that's more than just about its main character.
Yeah, definitely, and that also plays into the idea of enriching the entire world, the atmosphere of the film, and you're not just following a character.
Yeah.
You're experiencing the different spaces that the character occupies, and then the dynamics between the each of the different villains too. So it's really you get a sense of this crime world as a real place.
Yeah, and so that's one of the things that's really good about this. And the thing is, it's like it's just a really fun movie. It's like And this is something that's really kind of interesting because of the fact that, we've talked this year about these different movies that are mainly director driven. And I mean, to a certain extent, Payback is in that vein, even though Helgeland ended up not really having anything to do with the final product that came out in theaters. But it is still, if you look at his previous work in LA Confidential, you look at what we see on screen in Conspiracy Theory, you can tell that there's a very particular voice when it comes to crime and when it comes to this type of thriller. And it's something that's not necessarily, that we didn't necessarily see a lot of in the era. It's not necessarily something that they weren't big action extravaganzas. I mean, there's action in Payback, but there's not lots. I mean, there's action in Conspiracy Theory, but there's not really a lot. And then there are certainly action scenes in LA Confidential, but in all of those cases, it's more about the characters and the character stories and how those stories are moving forward to their conclusion.
Yeah, definitely.
What else do you have? Do you have anything that you want to point out when it came to Payback?
No, not really. Like you said, I mean, I guess I didn't find it to be too much of a film to pull things away from. It's the kind of film. It's a very smart film, but it's entertaining. It's just a fun ride.
Yeah, No, go ahead.
You can't I noted the opening shot.
Yeah.
The opening shot, I should say, in the theatrical version, and it's an ashtray filled with cigarettes and a cigarette being put out, and there's a lot of smoking in the film, and it's a dirty film. So just the idea that we open on this film, and right away it tells you this is going to be dirty, this is nasty, this is kind of gross, and it raw, gritty, all these other synonyms. Yeah. And I don't know, you end up getting more of that. And you also, the first few shots are close-ups. There are a lot of close-ups. So this is a film that gets in your face. Right. But I mean, other than that, I just see it as being very smart storytelling that has found the right pace. It seems to get every note. There are a couple little things that are really illogical, like real small moments, but they're so easily forgivable because the entire film is just so well done. Yeah. There's a moment like when Resnick, is that
yeah, that's his last name. Yeah, Val Resnick.
Oh no, not Resnick's character. I mean David Palmer's character.
Oh, okay.
When he gets shot, when he gets killed, the Chows drive up and they throw their weapons out there and start shooting up the taxi cab, and Porter slams Palmer's body up against the window to protect himself, and then he leaves, and the body just somehow magically just stays in place. That is just so ridiculous. But it's like, well, a movie has to have some kind of flaw, Yeah.
Well, and the thing that's interesting about this is that, one of the things I do like about it, and is that it's not really married to a specific time and place. Like if you told me that it took place in the 70s, I would believe it. If you told me it took place in the 80s or 60s or something like that, I would believe it. But it makes you wonder, what, at the same time, the fact that he's only looking for 70,000, and that's one of the running jokes of the movie, is that really it's like they always think it's more than what he's asking for. It's like, no, I just want 70,000. That's all I want. And like I like that that's sort of a running joke because of the fact that it is if you if you're watching it in 1999, you're like, how are you living off of $70,000? I mean that feels hard to do, but
Yeah, they may even overdo it a little bit, but I remember. I mean, I always loved that running
yeah.
gag, and it speaks to his moral code, as you mentioned before.
Mm-hmm.
But I do find when you look at the film a little too much, I started to look at the film a little too much. I found that it does this moral code idea does start to fall apart though, because it's not meant to be studied. And so basically, what you have is a character who, because he's been cheated, he's willing to cheat other people,
Right.
and he does cheat other people in small ways. And so this kind of plays into him being a bad guy.
Yeah.
But he's not exactly just a bad guy with other bad guys. He's a
Mhm.
bad guy to some common people.
Yeah.
Like when he's the identity off of this random guy off the street, and he steals the cigarettes off of the waitress.
Mhm.
And all this happens within the first 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And so he's set up to be, kind of a jerk, kind of, not.
Mhm.
But he's justified because he's been shot in the back, I
Yeah.
guess.
Well, and that plays into the tagline of the movie, which is "Get ready to root for the bad guy." I mean, that's basically the MO of this film: is that you're going to be rooting for a bad guy. Like in any other movie, this guy would be the one. He would be the villain, but in this particular case, filled with other villains who have arguably, treated him worse, he's kind of the good guy, and but ultimately he's also the one that we're going to be rooting for as well. And like you said,
Mhm.
I mean, there's not really a lot to really break down as far as themes, as far as ideas. It's basically just a really entertaining crime thriller. And I mean, that's all it is. And that's fine. Because, like,
Yeah.
we haven't really dealt with a lot of escapism in this retrospective of 1999. I mean, I've talked about the Mummy, I've talked about Fan Menace, I've talked about the Matrix. But I mean, even stuff like Fan Menace and Matrix, there's a little bit more. At least with the Matrix, there's a little bit more on the surface as far as thematically that you can get into. Something like the Mummy, it's more pure escapism. Something like American Pie is more pure escapism. And so, I mean, Payback's kind of the same way. And it's 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 an example of this year of 1999 being such a rich year because of the fact that even if you're talking about, like, this movie doesn't really do a whole lot stylistically that is necessarily groundbreaking, although there are certainly some really great things, interesting things that happen stylistically in this movie. It's just a fun movie to watch, and I mean, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, exactly. It's just the simple, not that it's simple, but the storytelling
Yeah.
was just done well. It didn't have to be, you don't, like you're saying, you didn't have to break any ground. Just do what you do, but do it well.
Yeah.
And this is a decent story. The story itself isn't even, original. Really, bad guy is betrayed, and then he goes through a chain of events to get revenge, or not revenge, but retribution, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's just done so well on pretty much every level.
Yeah, and
I'm very curious about. At some point, I'm going to be hunting down the director's cut because I'm very curious about it. There's all sorts of changes, different scenes, but the music is going to be different. It's going to have a different feel.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely going to be. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll definitely be curious of your thoughts on it when you do watch it. I'll be curious to see how you feel about it compared to the theatrical one. I I think overall, I feel like the director's cut's a bit better at what it's doing, but I think there's nothing wrong with the theatrical cut. The theatrical cut's fun. It's entertaining. It's a piece of, like we've said, it's just a piece of escapism. It's just a crime movie for the sake of being a crime movie, and there's not really much more to it. It's not trying to illuminate anything deep. It's just trying to be a fun movie, and I think it definitely pulls that off.
You said the source material is a novel from the 40s?
I don't know when the Westlake novel was written, but the first movie that was made into is Point Blank by John Borman. It was a '60s movie starring Lee Marvin in essentially the Mel Gibson role, which I've not seen. Point Blank. I know it's supposed to be a terrific movie. I just haven't had a chance to see it yet.
Yeah, I'm curious about that too. Is there any relation to then the Point Blank that came out years later? I think it was like the later 90s. I mean later 80s, or was that the 90s?
Oh, you mean
Point Blank?
Break? Are you talking?
Oh, I'm thinking of Point Break.
Yeah, Point Blank. That's a different movie. But
okay.
Yeah, I get those I've gotten those titles confused myself because it's just the one letter difference, but or couple of letter difference.
Yeah, no, I take that back.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly. No, I take that back.
But yeah, it's I will say, and one of the things that the director's cut is 90 minutes long, the theatrical cut is 101 minutes long. I like in both cases that there's not really a lot of fat on this movie. It's very trimmed down. It just, there's nothing that there. I don't think there are really any scenes in the theatrical cut that I'm like, that probably didn't need to be in there. Like everything sort of serves a particular purpose when it comes to telling this story.
Yeah, it's pretty tight.
Yeah.
Even so the film slows down when with Maria Bello's, with Rosie's scenes.
Yeah.
So that you have a little bit of the romance, which is a good throwback to the character, to the Porter's, previous,
right.
That old life that he had. But even, and it's there, some of it may feel a little tedious, but this is after me watching it like a dozen times,
Yeah.
But no, I think even those scenes are mostly tight, and then of course she becomes leverage for Val character, so she has to be important.
Right.
But you're absolutely right. Everything fits very nicely. It's a very tight film.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I did notice I like to try to find different either symbolism or different things that show what's happening below the surface, And I thought it was a pretty intentional choice to have Rosie drive at the end. She's the one that gets into the driver's seat and drives away, only because that Porter used to be her driver. And then just a few scenes before that, they had this exchange where they kind of come to realize Rosie should have stopped hustling a while back, and he should have stopped driving her.
Right.
So they had this little exchange, which works really cool. And so the idea that the film ends by Gibson giving up the wheel, essentially, then you can kind of infer. Well, it's suggested anyway that they're going to be starting over anyway. But I thought that was a nice detail that it's Rosie who drives.
Yeah. Well, Brian, thank you very much for joining me to talk about Payback today.
Oh yeah, thank you very much. Also, another great film, man, and it's a great talking to you about it and hearing what you have to say about it.
Yeah. I'd like to thank Brian Ackley for joining me today. It's always fun to talk to him. I've talked to him a few times. He was the writer of 2050. You can hear my interview with him and Princeton Holt on that movie on the Sonic Cinema podcast, as well as going back to our previous 1999 discussions on Being John Malkovich, as well as Bringing Out the Dead. Coming up is going to be an October like I haven't done here in a while. I'm getting away from the October horror month this year just because I'll probably still do my 10 favorites as far as horror movies as well as some new movies that come out. But ultimately speaking, I'm focusing more on getting ready for the last big push of the Sonic Cinema podcast's Class of 1999 series. And with that, we'll include podcasts on three of the biggest horror movies of 1999. We talked about a couple of the worst ones with Phil Faso earlier in the year. We're going to talk about three of the better ones. And I look forward to those discussions as well as more from 1999. Hit me up on patreon.com/Sonic Cinema as well as the Sonic Cinema YouTube channel. But for now, this is Brian Scuttle. Thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com.